Most children are born with perfect feet, yet most adults end up with foot pain and dysfunction. Our feet are our foundation for balance. So, is it really any surprise that 1 in 3 people over the age of 65 have a fall each year? Falls are Australia's leading cause of injury, hospitalisation and death. From the elderly to elite athletes, too many people are suffering injuries that could be prevented if they simply trained their balance daily. So why don't they? Balance is more than a skill. It's our foundation for lifelong movement, confidence, health, and happiness. Yet, in today's culture, balance is one of the most misunderstood and undervalued capacities we have. Welcome back to the Restore to Explore podcast. To kick off season 5, we have a very special series that's really close to our hearts. In these episodes, Nick and Jim will be bringing you powerful discussions that break down just why balance is so important, not just for your foot function, but your overall well-being, plus some tips on how you can start improving yours today. In the description, you'll also find a link to our free foot health assessment. This is a simple step-by-step test that takes less than 10 minutes, and out of it, you'll get a score out of 100. This will give you a snapshot of your own current foot function and balance level. Put simply, people shouldn't be falling over. I watched my late grandfather lose his quality of life after suffering several falls. I know you probably know someone who has been impacted too. That's why we need your help to spread awareness. So we have a big favour to ask. Share this podcast and the assessment far and wide with friends, family members, teammates. It may sound extreme, but this might help prevent an injury and could even save a life. Let's jump into the episode.
Okay, this episode is the second in our series about balance, and it's going to be all about falls and especially falls prevention. We wanted falls to be the first focus topic in this series because they are the most glaringly obvious and also the most dire, or have the most dire consequence when it comes to poor balance and the prevalence of very poor balance in our society. And it's something that affects, almost everyone either has had a family member who's had a fall or knows someone who's had a fall. It's very front of mind for most people and also very intuitive that poor balance equals falls. So it is important to note as well that falls is a massive and deep topic in itself. And so we're really only going to scratch the surface with this episode today. And we'll actually consider doing a full series just on falls because it could have a full series in itself. But for today, we just wanted to focus on taking a broad look at the problem of falls, the risk factors that are involved with falls. It's not just balance, it is a multifactorial phenomenon. The power of exercise for reducing falls risk, that's very well known and very important, and how we envision the TFC balance screen and TFC training playing a role in helping address the falls problem. So we figured we'd just start with some statistics. That sounded funny. Some statistics to paint the picture of the problem of falls. So globally, they're the second leading cause of injury-related death, and that's actually unintentional injury-related death, apparently.
As second only intentional injury-related
death? Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're second to road injuries globally. In Australia, apparently, they're not second to road injuries, but we must drive pretty well over here. But the World Health Organization estimates around 684,000 deaths from falls each year. And there's an increasing trend to the amount of falls and the amount of deaths as well. And 1 in 3 older adults, so people above the age of 65, fall each year. That actually jumps up to half, or 1 in 2 people above the age of 80 years old. And that ends up with approximately 37 million falls each year that are severe enough to need medical care, which is pretty crazy. And it's it's good to just pause on and think about the scale of that. 37 million falls severe enough to need medical care. And this is just falls that are, an unintentional, obviously unintentional accident basically, but not in the case of like falling off a cliff or like anything like that. It's literally just falling in daily life in your sort of daily environment, home or out and about. So of those injuries of those 37 million falls that create an injury that need medical care, falls injuries actually produce more years lived with disability than transport injuries, drowning, burns, and poisoning combined.
Wow.
And which is another interesting statistic and a little bit alarming. And they're actually a leading contributor to long-term disability. So it's not just about the deaths. It's not just about the injury that happens from a fall directly after. It's about what happens after the fall. And often that is a lot of disability. And an injury from a fall, especially something like a hip fracture or a head injury, almost doubles the risk of death over the following year. And also precipitates institutionalization, as in just going into care, and a loss of independence. So there's massive effects on people's quality of life, their ability to participate in activities. There's obviously impacts on families and communities. There's a lot of care that goes into, there's a lot of care that needs to happen after a fall. And it's not just about the one incident itself. So it's just interesting to reflect on those statistics. There's a million and more statistics that you could look into, but that's like a broad look at the problem of falls. And from a personal perspective, just this year, my grandma has gone into care as a result of a fall, and she's had multiple falls since as well. And even in the past, she's had falls that have resulted in hip fractures, and hip replacements, and she's managed to maintain her independence and living at home up until this year. But it's definitely, like I said, something that can have a big impact on families and is something that is harder and harder to address the more it happens, and is something that I'm particularly passionate about prevention, based on my own personal experience with it, and also having worked in aged care. I actually did a little stint in residential aged care when I was setting up the Foot Collective originally in 2018, the Foot Collective Australia, of course. And most of the residents that I talked to there, I ended up, having lots of chats with the residents as part of the physio, and often they would look forward to the chats more than the physio. But most of them were there because of a fall. They were, and they lost their independence, couldn't get it back, and yeah, it's actually quite confronting and a little bit depressing to see the results or the consequences of these falls, and it's just so unbelievably common, and we don't think it should be that common.
Agreed. It's pretty alarming when you see the stats and when you actually think of the scale of the amount of people. I think big numbers are very hard to wrap our heads around just in general. 37 million people. Like, what is that? What if you pictured the largest stadium that you've ever seen, maybe it's 100,000 people. There's 10 of those stadiums for every million, and then 37 times that. If you actually think of the sheer amount of people whose lives are seriously negatively affected by a fall, which was likely preventable with very simple things that should be gold standard in our sort of health protocol as a society, like a basic level, it makes it especially sort of sad, right? Like literally when you see someone doing behaviors that sabotage themselves, they do it unknowingly, and then you see so many people be affected by those behaviors. It's like you just want to yell out there and be like, why aren't people doing this? Why aren't people checking their balance? And my grandfather was, very active guy, very mentally sharp. He had a fall. I will say he was 100, literally. I think he was 100 or 101. and it was in the winter here in Canada when it is a bit slippery. So, maybe not as alarming than if he was like, 70, which is actually, people are commonly falling in their 70s and 80s.
Mm.
But with that said, the biggest thing I noticed was that after his fall, he broke his ankle. The actual ankle fracture itself was, it healed. Maybe his bones take longer to heal because he's not using his body as much. Or, he might not have the reservoir of capacity to heal super quick, but the actual bone will heal and will heal potentially just as strong as before. What I found really was affected was the fact that his movement independence was severely removed from him for a period of time while that ankle fracture healed. And that I think caused his mental capacity to degrade exponentially,
Mm.
right? He wasn't able to be as social. He couldn't go walk around. He wasn't able to be out in nature. He wasn't able to move. And I think the lack of movement, I think movement is literally the elixir our body needs to be able to do all the things it does: heal, um, purge damaged tissue, repair damaged tissue. And when you lose the movement part, which is also a big part of stimulating our brain, the the thing I saw with him is it was like a steep accelerated decline after his fall because he wasn't able to recover after that thing. Could it have been prevented? Potentially, but I think even just the context of the fall itself, I saw firsthand how quickly some people can degrade because movement and independence gets robbed from them. And later in life, some people don't make it past that. Some people don't get to the other side of that. And I think that's especially sad because someone whose grandfather has a fall at 70 and sees that sharp decline that I saw in my grandfather may have lost a lot of quality time with their grandfather just because balance wasn't on the radar of anyone that was dealing with his care. And I think we
Mm.
can change that and we should aspire to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it is important to note, I suppose, as I mentioned before, falls are multifactorial. And there's some of the biggest risk factors or the most well known. First of all, is a previous fall. So if you have a fall, your risk of having another fall doubles, which is
That in of itself says something, right? To me,
yeah.
that says we're not actually addressing the cause of the fall when people have a fall.
Mm. Well, either that and the consequences of the fall, like you said, a lot of it is deconditioning as a result of just having to spend time healing from an injury, or there's a fear of falling that comes from having a fall, and then that can make you less likely to want to go and participate in activities. So there's, a huge range of factors, but I think the biggest point there is, which we'll touch on later, is that we seem to be waiting for the fall to happen before trying to intervene. Or, that's generally the approach that happens, even though we know, scientifically and intuitively that we shouldn't. Generally, people have to have some big event, and this usually goes for any aspect of health or disease. There usually is a big trigger event that makes you go, "Oh my god, I have a really big problem with my health, and I need to do something about it." And whether that's a heart attack or a fall or whatever else,
Even an injury,
yeah, an injury, and
like a
it's like,
muscle tear or a joint dislocation or something.
yeah, it's like, wow, I had something going on, like a deficiency in something, or a health process going on that I wasn't aware of potentially, or wasn't front of mind enough for me to do anything about it, and now I really have to do something about it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that go into that previous fall, but I think to build on what you said, having a fall, we should really have very good, very clear action plans for people who've had a fall, and um, seizing that opportunity to rehabilitate well and to potentially even come back stronger than they were before the fall, depending on obviously the consequences of that fall. So the previous fall is the biggest risk factor. Obviously, muscle weakness and sarcopenia, as in just muscle loss, especially in the lower limb. That tends to happen with aging, but obviously, aging isn't the only factor because you can maintain a lot of muscle mass through exercise, a lot of muscle strength and mass through exercise, even while you age. Obviously, there's impaired balance or gait, walking, poor vision, and medications are also really well-known risk factors. Some other less-known risk factors, but also important, is actually footwear and foot problems. So people with foot pain or deformities are at high risk of falls, and people who wear loose-fitting shoes or very highly cushioned shoes are also at greater risk. And that relates to the sensory feedback that you're getting and obviously the risk of tripping. And interestingly, excuse me, interestingly, the recommendations on footwear like the best footwear to reduce risk of falls align pretty closely to our 5Fs. There's a firm, thin sole for sensory feedback. You want a low, broad heel that's not raised, a wide toe box to allow toe spread naturally, a slip-resistant outsole with high friction. That's not in our 5Fs, but I wonder if we could create an F word for that one.
Friction.
Friction. Yeah, of course. Yeah, friction. Okay,
That's
maybe we need a yeah. And then good fixation. And they've said comfort without excessive cushioning. And I think, just to touch on this foot topic briefly, people who have very sensitive feet or painful feet based on not training their feet or based on detraining their feet in shoes for a long time and wearing cushioned shoes more and more because their feet are becoming less and less resilient over time, they will sort of quote unquote need more cushioning to help their feet feel good. And so this is part of why we want to help people improve or like restore natural foot function, improve the resilience of their feet, because it just means that they don't have to rely on this cushioning that actually ends up being a falls risk. If you have to rely on cushioning all the time,
it reduces your foot's ability to actually feel the ground. It's like this, this cycle feedback loop, this vicious feedback loop where my feet are sensitive. I need more cushioning. I wear more cushioning. My feet become more sensitive. My feet are sensitive. And it's just like you end up at a Hoka. And especially with older adults, their shoes often look like padded bricks where they're super bulky, super rigid, super cushioned. You want to know the easiest way to reduce someone's balance, sensitivity, and ability to actually feel the ground? Do all those things. They're not good long term. So I think, it's good to be mindful of that and to remember, use it or lose it. If you don't use your sensors under the sole of your foot, you will lose the capacity for those things to sense to a high level, which is required for balance.
Mm-hmm. So, it's worth noting that footwear is really important and foot function is really important, which is, potentially a bit less well known, but also highly intuitive because our feet are our foundation for balance. We usually fall from a standing position on our feet. So anything going on down at the feet that affects the stability will affect our risk of falling. So other things are cognitive decline, other risk factors. Cognitive decline, a fear of falling, which often comes from an original fall. We've got hypotension, so orthostatic hypotension, where you stand up too quickly. Most people have experienced this. You stand up too quickly, you get a drop in blood pressure, and that can make you dizzy and precipitate a fall, especially the older you get, and especially the worse your balance is. Like I've actually done that a few times, stood up really quickly and been like, oh, I'm really glad my balance and stability is really good, because you do feel pretty head spinny, pretty dizzy. So you can imagine that on top of poor balance can obviously precipitate a fall. Hearing loss and vestibular dysfunction, obviously. Social isolation and reduced participation in activities. So that's another one that probably flies under the radar a bit. But if you're socially isolated, you're just not doing as much with people. And there's a lot of health issues that can come from that, but falls are one of them. Environmental hazards, lighting, trip hazards, things like that. Sleep disorders and fatigue, alcohol use, and socioeconomic status as well. So that
lots of factors.
Lots of factors. And same kind of thing goes for pretty much any chronic health condition. It's always going to be multifactorial, but we're going to focus mostly on the physical side of things. That's our area of expertise. And it's also the area that can have the most benefit across all populations, because regardless of any of these risk factors going on, it's known that exercise improves or decreases risk of falls. So obviously, being aware of those risk factors is really important, and addressing them where it's relevant is very, very important, while focusing strongly on improving capacity, especially balance, through exercise. So it's also worth noting that there's a few ways that you can test someone's physical capacity that relate to their falls risk. A number of ways. So there's the classic timed up and go. I've done a fair few of those in my life. You ask
Tug
someone
test.
to the tug. Yeah, you ask them to stand up from a chair, walk 3 meters, turn around, go back and sit down on the chair, and you time how long it takes them. And anything longer than 12 seconds apparently is predictive of future falls. There's that's a good one. It's nice and quick and can tell you a lot about, it's not just balance. It's probably less balance compared to like a single leg stance test, but it's combination of strength, mobility, power, and balance, getting up from a chair. So, and then you've got the speed of how fast you do that, which relates to power. So a really good one there. Sit to stand, the five times sit to stand. So just getting someone to stand up and down out of a chair 5 times and measuring how long it takes them to do that. Another good measure of power. And they found that power is more predictive of falls than strength. So strength is actually, like, differences in strength don't make a huge difference in falls risk, but differences in power definitely make a significant difference. And a lot of that is to do with how well you can reestablish your base of support. So how quickly you can reestablish a base of support. So obviously there's maintaining your balance, which is probably we would see as primary to all of that. But if you lose your balance, as anyone might, then how quickly can you if you lose your base of support, how quickly can you reestablish it? And that relates to power. So that's an interesting one. The Berg Balance Scale, or Berg Balance Score, is like 14 items. It includes a bunch of different things, takes a lot longer. Those 3 are more relevant for your older adults or people who are like already at risk of falls, essentially. Sit and rise is also a good one. We've talked about that on the podcast before, just your ability to get down onto the ground and back up without support. Or with minimal support from your hands. That predicts falls and also all-cause mortality. Even things like grip strength can predict falls as well. So basically, if you look at that in aggregate, it's just what is someone's physical capacity, which reflects how much movement they've done in their life, and that reflects their ability to maintain their balance throughout their lifespan. So really, really important stuff. The single leg stance test is probably the most simple and the quickest thing to test, and the most, it will show up deficits earlier in life. So that's a big part of why we focus on single leg stance. And I think, to touch on the physical capacity element here, your physical capacity doesn't just reduce your physical risk of falls, but if you've moved more, you've just got overall better health and vitality. We know that physical activity improves things like sleep, stress management, improves your metabolic health. Like, it improves all these aspects of health as well. And so practicing movement and improving your physicality isn't just like helping you reduce your physical risk of falls. It's also addresses all of those other, or many of those other risk factors, such as cognitive decline, such as the need for medication, such as blood pressure issues, etc. So in that sense, falls are multifactorial, and physical exercise or physical activity is like a multifactorial intervention as well.
Multivitamin. Movement multivitamin.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about this last week, that there's no reason to wait to be a certain age or to be in an age group that has a higher risk of falling to start practicing your balance. The earlier you start, the better. And this concept of early detection and early intervention, we think is really, really important. And it's actually a surprise that it's not more routinely done already based on what we understand about balance and falls. Um, but we think it's really important, especially to, like, even if you're in an at-risk age group, such as over the age of 65, and you haven't had a fall, um, it's really important to start, obviously, but especially before you have a fall, because a fall, like we said, creates all this cascade of effects that make it harder to engage in the falls preventing activities. So if you've got a fear of falling, or you end up on bed rest, or unable to mobilize for a period of time, and you end up deconditioned, it's a lot harder to get into an exercise program from a, both physically and mentally. It can be a lot harder to engage in an exercise program that will help. There is great evidence that shows that even post fall, exercise reduces your falls risk. It actually has a really good effect. But there are more barriers once you've had a fall. There's possibly more motivation, but also more barriers. So um, there's a really good meta-analysis that shows across 59 randomized controlled trials, shows that exercise reduces falls rate by 23%, with broad benefits across age, sex, prior fall status, when the program progressively challenges balance. So I think that those three words, progressively challenges balance, is pretty important. And the conclusion of that study was, given the certainty of evidence, effective programs should now be implemented. And those effective programs would, be at least 2 to 3 sessions a week, moderate challenge to balance. Obviously, you don't want to have extreme challenge to balance, because that can be a risk in itself, but moderate challenge. And you want to include narrow bases of support, things like reaching and turning, stepping reactions, lower limb strength, and dual task progressions.
Sounds a lot like soulmate training.
Yeah, I know. When I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's pretty much what we do. And I think that's what differentiates, well, that's a big differentiator between what we do and other typical exercise modalities that challenge balance. So if you think about yoga, you're holding a balanced position, for example, which is great, maybe a single leg stance or a split stance. There's a bunch of different poses in yoga that challenge your balance. Similar with Pilates, there'll be balance exercises that they do, or single leg exercises that they do. I'm yet to find a yogi or a Pilates practitioner who does well on the soulmate from the get-go. He might be better off than someone who hasn't done any exercise or balance training before, but there's a lot more that comes into falls prevention than just static balance. Static balance is very predictive of falls risk, but when it comes to mitigating falls risk, then you need to try and recreate certain situations that would happen. So a lot of falls happen because people are walking and then they turn quickly, and they have this sudden vestibular challenge that they can't deal with, and then they fall. Or they trip over something and they need to step really quickly, or they need to, they miss a step on the way down from the stairs, and that causes them to fall. So even just being on a soulmate means, and you're stepping off regularly, means you build that stepping reaction. You're on a narrow base of support, similar to a curb, something like that. And then we purposely integrate a lot of reaching and turning, strength, sort of isometric holds, and also dual tasks, as in like things as simple as just like throwing and catching, or playing games is a dual task, as in you're balancing while you're doing something else.
Yeah, when you're saying static balance, static balance can be tested, but life is not static. Life is full
Yeah.
of dynamic unpredictability, and you can't really adequately prepare for the challenges of life if you train something statically. And I think that's important, because it's not to think that you're just going to stand on one leg on flat ground, staring at one thing in a controlled environment and you're going to achieve whatever capacity you need for going on a hike or going around on curbs or something like that would be a bit naive. So, and frankly, it's not as fun, right? Static is not only as applicable, but it's just not as fun. It gets boring very quickly. You need something stimulating, challenging, that also can shift the demands based on the abilities that you're gaining, because your balance will also not be static. Your balance will be dynamic and constantly improving. And I think an element of playfulness helps people want to do it, but it also relates much more to everyday life, which is more unpredictable and less linear and static.
Yeah, exactly. And so obviously our TFC balance screen, which is live and available now. If you haven't already done that, you can actually watch the video on our YouTube channel. There'll be a link below, and also complete it through our foot health assessment on our website. So highly recommend doing that. It is static balance, but it's designed for early detection of deficits before you're really, ideally, before you're really at risk of falls, and even long before you're at risk of falls, as just a measure of your foot function and overall athleticism. Obviously, it doesn't actually test overall athleticism, but has high relevance to people who are athletic. Whereas something like a timed up and go or a Berg balance scale or something else that's traditionally used in balance assessment or falls risk assessment really doesn't apply to athletes and isn't sensitive enough to show up deficits much earlier in life. And so having a simple screen that anyone can do regularly by themselves, that gives them a lot of information about their foot function, about their lower limb integration, about their potential sports injury or falls risk, can be really, really powerful. But obviously, it needs to be combined with a training approach that, like you said, is actually engaging. And I think we talked about last week about the difference between efficacy and effectiveness. So while something might be efficacious, as in it works, and people actually need to be able to do it consistently in the real world for it to be effective. And so there's a lot of different group programs, like we mentioned. There's things like Tai Chi, there's yoga, there's Pilates, and there's like various group strength and balance training programs. And we think that's great. But I think across our culture, there also just needs to be, like, I think the way we're seeing it is almost turning balance into a sport in a sense, where people who play sport are independently motivated to improve their skills at home or do things to support their performance in their sport. And while not everyone really wants to play sports or has the ability to play sports, especially in the traditional sense, anyone can balance. And especially if you can stand up, then you can start engaging in TFC training. And you can do so much at home, and you can get so much out of, small bouts of frequent training. And then if you have the opportunity to test that out with a friend or a family member or a partner or someone that you can sort of have some friendly competition with, it actually turns it into a little bit of basically a sport that you're training for, rather than just thinking about, oh, I'm doing this to prevent a fall in 30, 40, 50 years. It's actually something that can become part of a culture and a community that all supports each other to continue improving their balance, not just for the sake of prevention, even though that is very, very important, but for the sake of fun and connection.
Yeah, if it's done in a way that's very work related, as in it's something you're doing that you don't really want to do, but you're doing it as a means to an end. It's like, I'm doing this thing that's boring so I don't fall in 40 years. That doesn't sound very sustainable or very enjoyable, frankly.
Yeah.
And the element of play that solves that is if something is playful and intrinsically rewarding, you're not doing it in order to get something else. You're doing it because you actually enjoy doing the thing. And if that thing can also give you the reward of not falling in 40 years, that's just kind of a bonus, but it's a byproduct of the fact that people actually do it. And I think if it's, balance is this very interesting thing where, if you want to become a better runner, do sprint training. But if you're a synchronized swimmer, sprint training might not benefit you, right? Maybe synchronized swimming is not the greatest example because they don't really need as much balance, but they do need vestibular sense. All I'm saying is sprint training is very specific to certain sports that involve running. There are sports that don't involve running necessarily in a straight line, but almost every sport that's done on two legs requires some element of balance. And so balance training is like the ultimate general physical preparation to make sure that all the athletic training you're doing in other domains, power, strength, all that kind of stuff, it's almost like coordination and balance is the filter that all those other skills must be put through in order to actually be applied without injuring you. If you're super strong, you built up all this muscle, but you can't coordinate those muscles to work in the right sequence in a safe way, all that muscle might actually make you get injured. And the thing that converts that muscular potential into safe and effective action is a system that can actually harness that muscular energy and apply it properly in the right way. And I think balance is really just working on all your feedback loops and coordination systems to make sure your body can do what it needs to do when it needs to do it without you having to consciously think about it, because you're training the body's reactive ability to stay upright and to solve all these small problems. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is not all specific sport training methods are going to be applied to every sport. But I think balance is one of them that actually applies to a much broader sort of net of many different and varied sports, and it also directly applies to just life in general, right?
Yeah.
If you live in India and you have to run from a tiger, sprint training might benefit you to stop you from dying. But if you live in a city, balance training and navigating curbs is probably be more beneficial than sprint training. So very applicable.
Yeah. And yeah, you can think about it as sports or just activities. Just like it has the most universal application across all activities, possibly besides swimming. In terms, even though there is balance involved in swimming, but anything we do on our feet, we're going to need some aspect of balance, especially if it involves walking, running, hopping, cutting, anything like that. We're going to have stability on one leg. And there's actually a systematic review that I saw on single leg balance training, and they found that there was generalization of the balance gains. So first of all, single leg balance ability is highly trainable. That's very well known. There's generalization of the gains to untrained tasks. So that means if you train single leg balance, you're not just going to get better at single leg balance. You're not just going to reduce your falls risk. You'll also get benefits across other tasks as well. And the other thing you get is cross education between legs, apparently. So if you train balance on one side, your balance on the other side gets better. And so this just speaks to balance being a really broad intervention that doesn't just target specific muscles, or doesn't even just target our musculoskeletal system. It challenges our nervous system. Obviously there's different elements of sensation, and the more highly tuned that balance system gets, the more it can adapt across lots of different domains and even side to side. So that's relevant if you've got an injury on one side, for example, and you want to improve the balance on that side. Like you don't have to wait until the injury is better. You can be working the other side and training the other side, and you'll get benefits between sides. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
The one thing I'll just tie, I got a good last minute tie in for the synchronized swimming thing. You have to walk across a slippery deck to get into the water. If your balance isn't good, you might fall and not make it to the pool. So balance training is good for synchronized swimmers.
There also. You go. Yeah, you still have to navigate to the pool. So yeah, we think that communities supporting each other to improve their balance is really, really important. You do see a lot of that, but nowhere near enough. We think that, a truly gamified system where progressive balance challenge is the focus, and the gamification of that through different levels and playing with a lot of different variables of coordination and dual tasking, um, is, first of all, really fun and really effective. And effective being something that people can do consistently. We get a lot of feedback um, from our customers and our community that they're really finding a lot of benefit in their training and a lot of fun, and that's only going to improve. We're in a process of updating and upgrading our soulmate training system and applying this level sort of belt system across all of our TFC training. And so it's really exciting to think about where this can go, especially in terms of getting, wherever people are starting. A lot of people find us because of foot pain. So we know that improving foot pain and improving footwear is going to help reduce risk of falls in the long run. So there's that. But they're improving their foot pain and footwear while also improving their balance because of our training, the way our training focuses on balance. And so that's going to improve their falls risk. Then they're getting addicted to this process, and then they're getting their husband or wife or children or parents involved because they're finding that it's so much fun and that it's making them feel so good that they want to spread that message. And so this is how, obviously we're just one piece of the puzzle, but this is how a culture can shift from being broadly unaware of the ability to train balance and the importance of training balance or how to, and updating this cultural belief to being like, everyone should train their balance. It's highly possible to improve. It's actually, very quick to improve with consistent practice. And it's really fun to do. And it's something that I can do to connect with my family and friends as well. And so that's our vision with this.
Make healthcare fun.
Yeah, make healthcare fun. Yeah, make prevention fun, because really it's, as much as it would be great if everyone just thought about the next 50 years and just, wanted to focus on the prevention. Realistically, there has to be more of an immediate motivation, and that motivation is fun. And the good part is the fun doesn't just make it more engaging and sustainable, it actually makes it more effective. Like, the more fun you have with it, it is literally more effective, in the sense that you get more coordination going, you get more strength-based elements going, you get a bit of competition. It actually forces you to improve in lots of different ways beyond just standing on one leg. And there's a lot of tips out there in terms of, and we've put some tips out, like standing on one leg while you clean your teeth, standing on one leg while you wait for your kettle to boil for your coffee or your tea in the morning. And those are really great things to do. And even, Nick, you and I have been doing a regular check-in of our balance, checking in with one of the levels from the TFC balance screen and treating that as both a check-in and a training stimulus to improve. So all of these sort of tiny habits really add up, and they're really great. But to truly progress your balance over time, in the most fun and effective way, you really do have to carve out a bit of focused time. It doesn't have to be huge, and it should be in tandem with other things as well. Like, strength training is really great, mobility training, even falls training, which is probably a topic for another time. But learning how to fall, I think, is a really great skill. It should be combined with all of that, but some focused training on your balance with the mindset of consistently progressing and updating your Goldilocks zone of difficulty makes for, like I said, a much more effective time, much more fun, and you'll see the results a lot more quickly, which then just feeds that feedback loop of motivation, because results drives the emotions of success, and the emotions of success drive behavior in a lot of ways.
Agreed. So to summarize, falls are a way bigger problem than people think. The consequences of a fall later in life can be severe. At its worst, death. People are literally falling to their death because their balance systems are really decalibrated, and no one's really paying enough attention to say we need to check this in everyone. Like, part of every medical or rehab assessment is a drug history. What drugs have you been taking or are currently taking? Because that's just part of a thorough medical history or examination history. How's your balance? When's the last time you screened your balance? Well, I don't even know what that means. Well, let's do it. It takes less than 10 minutes, and it will literally give us a snapshot of where you're at right now and identify if it's a really big problem that you should deal with, because training your balance is simple, can be extremely fun, it's free. The reward on time invested is drastic if your balance is at a really low level, because falls can be super dangerous. So falls are a bigger problem than people think. The effects of a fall can be way more intense than they should be. Most of the falls are preventable. We need a way to measure it, and we need to make it standard in the culture in the world of health and rehab, to assess people's balance and to direct them towards resources that allows them to have fun playing with developing better balance, because their life could depend on it. So I think that's, we have a lot of fun at TFC, and sometimes that almost, has made me, in the past, it's made me question, like, is this actually this is way too fun to be this effective. But when I go back and think about it, it's like, that's part of why it's effective, is because it's fun. Because if we had some fancy, boring protocol for improving lower body health, and it was like great when people did it, but no one did it because it was boring, guess how effective it would be? Not very effective. Whereas simple things, because our bodies are so complex, simple things that allow us to play with the unpredictability of life and build resilience by having fun, exploring all these different creative ways of moving, can actually be not very much work, can be super enjoyable, can be really fun to do with others, and they can be one of the most effective things you can do. It seems like that shouldn't be the case. It almost seems too good to be true. But I think what we've realized at TFC with balance is that actually it isn't too good to be true. It's true. And now we have a way to measure it. And it probably just re-upped our motivation to keep developing this, keep making it more fun, creating more opportunities for people to have fun together, and to make the system more welcoming and more approachable by as many people as possible. So train your balance.
Great summary. Train your balance. Take the screen, get your little balance avatar, and get your balance score, and treat that as a motivation of, okay, here's my score. Here's how I train it. Train it daily, even if it's just tiny little doses, and you will see an improvement, and that will start feeding the cycle. And get a friend or family member involved, because you can keep each other accountable and you can have a lot of fun with it together. And that's how this spreads, is people like, I think I said, no, I didn't say it last week, but I'm going to say it now. Friends don't let friends have bad balance, basically. Like we should
I was going to say, friends don't let friends fall to their death. But yeah, your way was nicer.
But if you're a really good friend or a really good family member, if you're a good person, you'll help other people realize that balance is important and it's trainable and it's fun to train. Especially if you have that realization yourself. And that's essentially what's happened to us, and a big reason why we've, been committed to this company for so long, to this collective, is because we had that realization, and we realized that we needed to be a part of spreading that education and spreading that awareness and helping people engage in the training. So if you're listening to this and you've resonated with this, obviously start with yourself, but see where you can get to with getting other people on board, even if it's just them screening their balance and getting their score. That's a really cool way to, just start with the screen. And then we've got a video on how to start training at different levels, and there'll be more videos coming out as well, all free. So, very accessible. We want this to be an extremely low cost, low risk, low time investment, high bang for buck thing that you can do either by yourself or preferably with family and friends. So really appreciate you listening and tuning in. And Nick,
my check-in today was level 3, aced it 60%.
Nice.
Was a little bit harder endurance-wise on the right side, and it was after a streak of missing my check-in. So today I began again, And probably for this podcast, I was like, I need to screen my balance. Did level 3, felt great.
Nice. Oh, I'm gonna go and do level 4 right now, and
just won me up.
I'll report back next week on what I
Sounds
get.
good. Thanks for
Cool.
listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.